terribly provocative here, but I am going to say that religion is really a bit of a game. And I don't say that in all bad. It is a bit of a game. I look at it like this. Games are an important part of our lives. Games provide for us a little bit of wish fulfillment. Games provide an outlet for us to have a real need, a real yearning satisfied kind of in a consequence-free environment. You know what I mean? For instance, men like to be in combat. That's where God made men. They like to fight. They like to engage in battle and combat with one another. But as you well know, wars are costly, and they have real consequences. And they destroy things, and lives are lost, and there's a lot of blood and pain, and lots of casualties, and so on and so forth. So we create the game of football. And in football, men can gather together, form alliances, form a team, soldiers. They can get uniforms on, and they can go to a battlefield, and they can amass their forces against another force, and then they can run right into the middle and fight, right? And one group of men can push the other group of men off of their land and can push them all the way back into retreat until they finally score a touchdown, right? But the wonderful thing about football is that at the end of the game, everybody takes off their helmet, shakes hands, hugs, has a shower, and goes home. Right? It's kind of a consequence-free environment to fill that need. It's just an outlet, though. Girls love romance, for instance. There's a game we play at camp that I don't particularly like, but kids like. It's called Winkum. And at camp, senior campers don't like it as much as junior campers, but suffice it to say, the game of Winkum, guys and girls get to wink at each other. It's kind of like a flirting game. I don't know why, but people love to play it. But you get, and it's kind of, I think it's somewhat helpful. Girls get to wink at guys and they respond, and guys get to wink at girls and they hop out of their chair and come to them. There are no marriage proposals at the end of the game or anything. Nobody gets married. So it's kind of a consequence-free environment. Nobody's beholden to the person they went to in the game, but they still get to have that need kind of met a little bit, that yearning met. You get the idea. Some people want to make a lot of money. You can play Monopoly on a rainy afternoon. You can become king of the railroad, utilities, and properties, and so on and so forth, and you can get a lot of pastel-colored money if you really want. But it's consequence-free. All the money goes back into the bank, and the hotels and houses go back into the bag, and you fold it up, and it's over with. Religion is kind of such a game. And I say that carefully, because what you need to understand is that we do have a need for spiritual exercise. We all have a desire to achieve a metaphysical diversion in our lives. That's very common for all of us. And that spiritual need, that need to exercise our spirituality and to enjoy a metaphysical diversion can be met in the proper practice of religion. And it can meet a short-term need in your life. But the practice of something should never come before the possession of it. And what the point I want to make today, which is the point Christ was making to people who are engaged in a ritual, in a rite, in a festival, is that what Christ came to offer was not the symbol of the thing, but the substance of it. He did not come to give you a practice or a rite to perform, but rather the possession of the real thing itself. Two people, they don't kiss to fall in love. Kissing is the evidence of an overflow of an affection that's already been achieved. And in the same way, you don't go to religion to fall in love with God. Religion is the proper outflow of an affection that's already been achieved. And you and I well know that no girl is satisfied with winking forever. They want the real thing eventually. And you know that no bills are paid with Monopoly money, right? You can't pay bills with Monopoly money. And now you also know that no freedoms are secured in this world with touchdowns. They're achieved through real warfare. In the same way, you cannot find joy and contentment and peace today through religion and through the proper practice of religion. You can't do it. You can't achieve it through church attendance. If you want to have real contentment, real peace today, if you want to have real victory in Christ, it has to be achieved through Christ himself. Okay? Not through the symbol, not through the act. Now, I'm not diminishing the symbol and the act. It's an important part of our lives, but it can't come first. And that's what Jesus was saying. He was not besmirching this festival that they were taking part in, but he was trying to show them that that which they were symbolizing, he was giving in substance, and they needed to find him instead of the symbol. Let's try to draw that out for just a moment here in this passage. The first point that Christ is making is the need to find the supremacy of substance over symbol. Look at verses 37 to 39. John writes, "Now on the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, 'If any man is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the Scripture said, from his innermost being shall flow rivers of living water.' But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. The Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified." What feast are we talking about here? This is the Feast of Tabernacles. The Jewish people had lots and lots of feasts, and one of the feasts was the Feast of Tabernacles. This was a harvest feast. It was a feast that took place at the end of harvest. And what everybody would do is they would go and they would build little tents for themselves, or little lean-tos. And the feast was supposed to commemorate the time that they spent in the wilderness. Whenever they were going from Egypt to Canaan, and they spent time in the wilderness. What they would do is they'd all kind of camp out for a week. Everybody would leave their homes, and they'd go build a little tent or a little shack, and they'd go live in it. And they'd party for a week doing that. And they'd be remembering the provision of the manna in the wilderness. And then later the provision of the milk and honey as well. Okay? And so as they recreated and relived for a week's time what it must have been like for their forefathers to spend that 40 years in the desert, it was to remind them of God's provision. You get the idea. But the final day of the feast was the greatest day of the feast. And the wine would be flowing. The fatted calf would have been on the grill. There would have been mounds of cake on every table. And it would have been very festive. Everybody would have been out of their homes, out camping outside. You could just picture it. It was a national holiday, and it was a huge feast. It was kind of like Thanksgiving times 7, times 10. Big, big day. Big deal. And Jesus went to the very heart and center of it all. And he stood up in the midst of all this merrymaking and festivity, and he cried out. And what did he cry out? He cried out and said, "Listen, if anybody is thirsty," which none of them were thirsty, "but if anybody is thirsty, they can come to me and drink. And I will provide for them a quenching which will be eternal. Out of their inner being will flow a river of living water." So Jesus basically was coming to say, what you are now celebrating in symbol, I am going to give you in substance. That which your forefathers only dreamed about, that which they ate the manna and they got hungry again. They drank the